When a feared biker stops his roaring motorcycle at the edge of a desolate road, he finds a young girl lying injured and terrified, whispering, "Please don't hurt me. I can't move." Known for his rough past and cold heart, the man shocks everyone, including himself, with what he does next. His act of compassion sets off a journey of redemption, healing, and an unlikely bond that proves even the toughest hearts can learn to care again. The leather-clad stranger with tattoos covering his arms and a reputation that makes grown men step aside becomes an unexpected guardian angel. His gentle response to her desperate plea transforms not just her world, but his own damaged soul. What started as a chance encounter on an empty highway becomes a story of second chances and the power of human kindness. But what did this hardened biker do that changed everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Harley-Davidson roared through the empty stretch of Highway 49, its chrome pipes echoing off the canyon walls like thunder trapped in stone. Jake "Reaper" Morrison gripped the handlebars with calloused hands, each knuckle bearing scars from fights he'd rather forget. The wind whipped through his graying beard as he leaned into a curve, seeking the kind of peace that only came when asphalt disappeared beneath spinning wheels. This morning had started like every other since he'd walked away from the Crimson Wolves Motorcycle Club 6 months ago. Coffee black as his mood, stale toast, and the crushing weight of a life spent on the wrong side of everything decent. The cramped apartment above Murphy's auto shop offered little comfort, but it was honest work that kept his hands busy and his conscience quieter than it had been in years. The torn hospital bracelet in his jacket pocket crinkled as he shifted position. Emma's bracelet. He'd found it stuck to his boot after leaving St. Mary's Hospital 3 days ago, where he'd witnessed a young girl being wheeled in with injuries that made his stomach clench. Something about her terrified expression had haunted his sleep ever since. Jake throttled down as he approached a sharp bend, muscle memory from 2 decades of riding keeping him steady. The desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated only by Joshua trees standing like sentinels against the pale morning sky. This was his sanctuary now, these long rides where the past couldn't follow and the future remained mercifully unclear. The Crimson Wolves had been his family for 15 years. Brothers bound by blood, chrome, and a code that demanded loyalty above all else. But loyalty, Jake had learned, was a currency that bought different things depending on who was spending it. When President Viper Castellanos ordered him to torch a rival's business with families sleeping upstairs, Jake had drawn a line he couldn't cross. Walking away hadn't been clean. Nothing with the Wolves ever was. They'd let him leave breathing, but barely, and only because his military service had earned him enough respect to buy his way out with broken ribs instead of a shallow grave. The price was exile from everything he'd known, everyone he'd called brother, and the constant awareness that his past could catch up with him at any moment. The motorcycle's engine coughed as Jake crested a hill, and that's when he saw it. Skid marks scarred the asphalt in violent black arcs, leading to a sedan wrapped around a telephone pole like twisted metal origami. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and the driver's door hung open at an unnatural angle. Jake pulled over, boots hitting gravel as he dismounted. His military training kicked in automatically, scanning for threats and casualties, while his civilian conscience warred with the biker's instinct to keep riding. This wasn't his problem. Getting involved meant questions, police reports, and attention he couldn't afford, but then he heard it. A small voice, weak as a whisper, but sharp as broken glass against his heart. "Please don't hurt me. I can't move." She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Dark hair matted with blood, school clothes torn and dirty. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made Jake's medical training from his army days sound alarm bells in his head. She lay 15 feet from the wreckage, probably thrown clear on impact. Her wide brown eyes tracking his approach with the kind of terror that came from knowing the world could turn dangerous without warning. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jake's voice came out gentler than it had in months, a tone he'd thought he'd lost forever. He dropped to one knee beside her, careful not to move too quickly. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Jake, and I'm here to help." The little girl's breathing was shallow, her face pale beneath the grime. "Mama," she whispered. Jake glanced toward the car. No movement, no sound except the hiss of escaping coolant. His throat tightened as he recognized the signs he'd seen too many times in Afghanistan. "Some battles were over before the medics arrived. Let's focus on you right now, okay?" He pulled off his leather jacket, revealing arms covered in tattoos that told the story of a harder life. But his hands were steady as he gently covered her with the jacket's warmth. "Can you tell me your name?" "Emma?" Her voice was getting stronger, which Jake took as a good sign. "My leg hurts real bad." "I know it does, Emma. I'm going to call for help, and then I'm going to stay right here with you until they come. Is that okay?" For the first time since he'd found her, something like trust flickered in her eyes. Jake reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the emergency contact as he made a decision that would change everything. Jake knelt beside Emma, his massive frame somehow managing to appear less threatening as he moved with the careful precision of someone who understood fragile things. The faded photograph tucked behind his driver's license seemed to burn against his chest, a constant reminder of another little girl who had needed his protection and received only his absence. "I need to check your injuries, Emma. I'm going to be very gentle, but I need you to tell me if anything hurts worse when I touch it, okay?" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to crisis situations, but softened with a tenderness that surprised them both. Emma nodded, her small hand clutching his jacket where it covered her chest. Jake's trained eye assessed her condition with the methodical approach he'd learned in Army medical training. Her left leg showed obvious signs of fracture, and the way she favored her right side suggested possible rib damage. But her pupils were responsive, her speech clear, and most importantly, she was conscious and alert. "You know, Emma, I used to be a soldier," Jake said as he carefully examined her injuries, his hands steady despite the emotions churning in his chest. "We learned how to help people who got hurt. I'm going to take real good care of you until the doctors get here." The child's eyes widened with something approaching wonder. "A real soldier? Did you fight bad guys?" Jake's smile was genuine for the first time in months. "Sometimes, but mostly I helped people, just like I'm helping you now." He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb already dialing 911. "I'm going to call for an ambulance, and then we're going to wait together. How does that sound?" "Okay." Emma's voice was stronger now, though Jake could see the pain she was fighting to hide. "Will you stay with me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Another little girl had asked him the same thing 5 years ago, and he'd promised he would be back from the club run before bedtime. But club business had run long, drinks had flowed freely, and by the time he'd made it home, the accident had already happened. His daughter Lily had died asking for her daddy, and he'd been 3 states away playing outlaw. "Yes," he said, the word carrying the weight of old promises and new determination. "I'll stay right here with you." The 911 operator's voice crackled through the phone's speaker as Jake provided location details and Emma's condition. His military experience guided his responses, clear and concise information that would help the paramedics prepare before arrival. He kept one hand gently resting on Emma's shoulder, an anchor of warmth and safety in a situation that could have easily terrified her further. "The ambulance is coming, sweetheart. They'll be here in about 10 minutes. Jake pocketed his phone and settled more comfortably beside her. "Do you want to tell me about school? What grade are you in?" "3rd grade. Mrs. Peterson is my teacher, and she's really nice. She lets us have extra recess when we're good." Emma's words came easier now, the conversation helping to distract her from the pain. "Are you really going to stay?" Jake nodded, surprised by how much he meant it. "I promise." "You know what? I have something that might help you feel better." He reached into his wallet, fingers finding the worn photograph he'd carried for 5 years. His daughter Lily smiled back at him from the picture, gap-toothed and grinning. "Frozen forever at age 7, this is my little girl. Lily, she was about your age when this picture was taken." Jake's voice caught slightly, but he pressed on. She always said that when you're scared or hurt, it helps to think about happy things. Can you think of something that makes you really happy? Emma considered this seriously, her pain momentarily forgotten. My teddy bear, Mr. Patches, and ice cream. And when Aunt Sarah reads me stories before bed. Her face clouded slightly. But Aunt Sarah's at work. She won't know where I am. We'll make sure she knows you're okay, Jake assured her, though something about her words troubled him. Where were her parents? Why was she being cared for by an aunt? The doctors will call her for you. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew steadily louder. Jake felt a complex mix of relief and reluctance. Relief that professional medical help was approaching, but reluctance to surrender his role as Emma's protector. Something about this child had awakened feelings he'd thought were buried with his daughter. I hear the ambulance, Emma said, her grip tightening on his jacket. That's good news. They're going to take excellent care of you. Jake carefully adjusted his position to shield her from the worst of the wind. And remember, I promised I'd stay with you. That means I'm going to ride with you to the hospital if they'll let me. The sirens grew deafening as the ambulance rounded the curve, followed closely by a sheriff's patrol car. Jake steeled himself for the inevitable questions, the suspicious looks, the assumption that a man like him had no business being kind to an injured child. But as the paramedics approached, he kept his focus on Emma. See, help is here, just like I promised. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their surprise evident when they discovered Jake had already performed a thorough assessment of Emma's injuries. Lead paramedic Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran, raised an eyebrow as Jake rattled off Emma's vital signs and symptoms with military precision. You have medical training? She asked, securing Emma to a backboard with gentle expertise. Army medic. A beak and airborne. Jake stepped back to give them room, but kept his eyes on Emma. Possible fractured fibula, suspected bruised ribs on the right side. No signs of head trauma or internal bleeding. Santos nodded approvingly. Good assessment. Probably saved her from further injury by keeping her still. She turned to Emma with a warm smile. Hey there, sweetie. We're going to take you for a ride to the hospital, okay? Emma's eyes immediately sought Jake. Is Mr. Jake coming too? The sheriff's deputy, a weathered man named Coleman, stepped forward with the inevitable clipboard and suspicious expression. His gaze lingered on Jake's tattoos, the Crimson Wolves logo partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve, despite Jake's attempt to cover it. I'll need to get a statement from you, Coleman said, his tone carefully neutral. Your name? Jake Morrison. He kept his voice steady, though he could feel the familiar tension that came with police encounters. Under his shirt, hidden beneath layers of ink and scar tissue, the military dog tag pressed against his chest like a talisman from a better time. Any relation to the victim? No, I found her like this. Jake watched as the paramedics loaded Emma into the ambulance. Can I ride with her? She's scared. Coleman's expression softened slightly at the genuine concern in Jake's voice. That's up to the paramedics in the hospital. I'll follow up with you there after I process the scene. Santos overheard and made a quick decision. She's asking for you, and calm patients heal better. You can ride, but no interference with our work. Jake climbed into the ambulance, settling on the bench opposite Emma's stretcher. She reached out her small hand, and he took it gently, his massive fingers engulfing her tiny ones. See, told you I'd stay with you. The ride to St. Mary's Hospital passed in a blur of medical procedures and Emma's brave attempts not to cry. Jake found himself remembering another ambulance ride 5 years ago, racing to Children's Hospital, only to arrive too late. His daughter Lily had been alone when she died, her last words asking for her daddy, who was out playing biker instead of being home where he belonged. At the hospital, controlled chaos took over. Emma disappeared behind swinging doors marked Authorized Personnel Only, leaving Jake alone in a waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. He slumped into an uncomfortable plastic chair, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of what had just happened. Excuse me, are you the man who found Emma? Jake looked up to see a nurse approaching, her expression professionally kind but wary. Yes, ma'am. There's a woman here asking about her. Says she's the child's aunt. Through the automatic doors, Jake saw a woman in her early 30s rushing toward the information desk. She wore scrubs and looked like she'd come straight from work, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her face carried the particular strain of someone who'd received the call every guardian dreads, Sarah Martinez. The nurse called out. The woman spun around, relief and terror warring on her features. "Yes, that's me. Where is she? Is Emma okay?" Jake watched from his corner as Sarah spoke rapidly with the medical staff, her hands shaking as she signed forms and answered questions. When her eyes finally found him across the waiting room, her expression shifted to something harder to read. "You're the one who found her?" Jake stood, suddenly conscious of how he must look to her. 6'3" of leather and ink, beard still damp with sweat from the ride, hands that had done violence now fidgeting with a child's teddy bear he'd forgotten he was holding. "Yes, ma'am." She was asking for this. He held out the stuffed animal, which had somehow survived the crash. Thought she might want it. Sarah's hostility wavered as she took the bear, recognizing its importance. "Mr. Patches, she never goes anywhere without him." She studied Jake more carefully. "The nurse said you stayed with her, rode in the ambulance." She was scared. "It seemed like the right thing to do. And you are?" "Jake Morrison." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "The motorcycle guy? Deputy Coleman mentioned you when he called." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "He also said Emma's injuries could have been much worse if someone hadn't kept her from moving around." Jake shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sarah said quietly. "They wouldn't have." "Thank you." The simple gratitude hit Jake harder than any punch he'd ever taken. He nodded once and turned to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" "Hospital's no place for someone like me. Emma's safe now. That's what matters." But as Jake walked toward the exit, he could hear Emma's voice calling from somewhere behind the medical curtains, asking for Mr. Jake. And each step away felt like abandoning her all over again. The Roadhouse bar sat at the edge of nowhere, its neon beer signs casting sickly colors across the gravel parking lot. Jake nursed his second whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to quiet the voices in his head. Emma's frightened face kept flashing before his eyes, mixing with memories of Lily until he couldn't tell past from present. Another? The bartender, a grizzled man named Pete who asked no questions and expected no answers, gestured toward Jake's empty glass. Better not. Jake pulled a 20 from his wallet. But as he did, something small and brown tumbled to the floor. Emma's teddy bear, somehow forgotten in his jacket pocket. He stared at it lying there on the sticky barroom floor, Mr. Patch's button eyes seeming to accuse him of abandonment. The bear changed everything. Jake threw the 20 on the bar and headed for the door, Lily's voice echoing in his memory. "Daddy, you promised you'd come back." The ride back to St. Mary's Hospital felt different this time. Purpose drove him instead of duty, and when he walked through the automatic doors, carrying the small stuffed animal, he felt more like a man with a mission than an intruder in a world where he didn't belong. The night shift nurse, a kind-faced woman named Helen, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Morrison, Emma's been asking for you. Room 314, Jake's heart clenched. Is she okay?" "Stable. Fractured leg, as you suspected, but no internal injuries." "She's lucky you found her when you did." Helen's voice carried professional warmth. "She keeps talking about the nice man who stayed with her." Room 314 was small and sterile, dominated by machines that beeped softly in the darkness. Emma lay propped up in the hospital bed, her left leg encased in a bright pink cast. She looked impossibly small against the white sheets, but her eyes lit up when she saw Jake in the doorway. "Mr. Jake, you came back?" "Course I did. Brought someone who missed you." He held up Mr. Patches, and Emma's whole face transformed with joy. "You found him. I thought he was gone forever." She hugged the bear close, then looked up at Jake with serious eyes. "Are you going away again?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Jake settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his large frame awkward in the small space. "Not if you don't want me to." "I don't want you to." Emma's voice was small but firm. "Aunt Sarah had to go back to work. She works at the other hospital taking care of sick people. She can't stay with me all the time." Something in her tone made Jake lean forward. "Emma, where are your mom and dad?" Emma's expression clouded, and she clutched Mr. Patches tighter. "They went to heaven. In a car accident like me, but they didn't get better." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Aunt Sarah says it's not my fault, but sometimes I think it is." Jake's throat constricted. Why would you think that, sweetheart? Because we were coming to see me in the school play. If I hadn't been in the play, they wouldn't have been driving that night. Tears began to slip down Emma's cheeks. And now Aunt Sarah has to take care of me, but she's sad all the time. And I heard her on the phone saying she doesn't know how to do it by herself. The weight of Emma's guilt and fear settled over Jake like a familiar burden. He'd carried similar guilt for 5 years, blaming himself for Lily's death, for not being there when she needed him most. But looking at this brave little girl, he saw clearly what he'd been too blind to see in his own situation. "Emma, listen to me." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "What happened to your parents wasn't your fault. Sometimes bad things happen, and there's nobody to blame. Your mom and dad loved you enough to drive through the night to see you in a play. That's what parents do when they love their kids. But Aunt Sarah is probably scared. Taking care of someone you love when you don't know what you're doing is frightening. But that doesn't mean she doesn't want you. Sometimes adults need help too." Emma considered this, her 8-year-old wisdom processing complicated emotions. "Do you think she really wants me? I think she loves you more than anything in the world. And I think she's doing the best she can." Jake hesitated, then made a decision that surprised him. "Would it help if I talked to her? Maybe I could help sometimes. You would do that?" Emma's eyes widened with hope. "But you don't even know us." Jake reached out and gently straightened Mr. Patch's bow tie. "Sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Sarah appeared in the doorway, still wearing scrubs but looking less frazzled than before. Her expression softened when she saw Jake sitting beside Emma's bed. "I see you found Mr. Patches. Mr. Jake brought him back," Emma announced proudly. "And he says he's going to help us." Sarah's eyes met Jake's over Emma's head, a silent question passing between them. Jake stood slowly, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what he was offering. "If you'll let me," he said simply. The manila envelope landed on Sarah's kitchen table with the weight of bureaucratic finality. She stared at the legal custody papers, her hands trembling as she read the social services letterhead. Emma sat at the far end of the table, colouring carefully within the lines of a princess picture, her casted leg propped on a pillow. "What does it say?" Emma asked without looking up from her crayons. Sarah forced her voice to stay calm. "Just some paperwork, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But worry was exactly what Sarah felt as she scanned the document. A formal review of Emma's living situation, triggered by the accident report. Questions about Sarah's financial stability, her work schedule, her ability to provide adequate supervision for a child with special needs. The implication was clear: prove you're capable, or we'll find someone who is. Jake knocked on the apartment door at exactly 6 o'clock, as he had every evening for the past week. Sarah had been surprised when he'd first offered to help with Emma's care, more surprised when he'd actually followed through. Ben, like him, in her experience, made promises easily but rarely kept them. Mr. Jake. Emma's face lit up as he entered, carrying his usual offering of takeout dinner from whatever restaurant struck his fancy. Tonight it was Chinese food, the smell of sweet and sour chicken filling the small apartment. "How's my favorite artist today?" Jake settled his large frame carefully on the couch, mindful of Emma's injured leg. "What are you working on?" "A castle, see? It has a moat and everything." Emma held up her colouring book proudly. "Aunt Sarah says real castles had moats to keep bad people out." Jake's eyes found Sarah's over Emma's head, noting the stress lines that seemed to deepen daily. "That's beautiful work. You're getting really good at staying in the lines." Sarah watched this interaction with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Jake's gentleness with Emma was undeniable, but she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting help from a man like him was inviting complications she couldn't handle. The leather jacket, the tattoos, the way other people stepped aside when he walked past, everything about him screamed danger. "Emma, why don't you wash your hands for dinner?" Sarah suggested, needing a moment alone with Jake. Once Emma had crutched her way to the bathroom, Sarah pulled out the legal papers. "We need to talk." Jake's expression grew serious as he read the official language. "They're challenging your custody?" "Not exactly, but they're questioning whether I can provide adequate care." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I work 12-hour shifts, Jake. I can barely afford this place, and now with Emma's medical bills, what do you need? The simple question caught Sarah off guard. Not offers of advice or hollow reassurances, just a direct inquiry about practical needs. I need to prove I can take care of her properly. That means reliable childcare, better living conditions, evidence of financial stability. Sarah laughed bitterly. None of which I can provide on a nurse's salary. Jake studied the papers more carefully, his finger tracing the legal requirements. This evaluation date, it's in 2 weeks. Yes, they'll interview Emma, inspect the apartment, review my finances. If they decide I'm not suitable, Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. They won't. Jake's voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. We won't let that happen. We? Sarah stared at him. Jake, I appreciate everything you've done, but this isn't your problem, isn't it? Jake's grey eyes met hers steadily. That little girl in there asked me not to leave. I gave her my word. You don't understand what you're offering. Getting involved with social services, having your background scrutinized, it could cause problems for you. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a check already made out to Sarah Martinez for $5,000. Jake, I can't. It's not charity. Consider it an investment in Emma's future. He set the check on the table beside the custody papers. Use it for whatever you need. Deposits on a better apartment, childcare, legal fees. Whatever it takes. Sarah stared at the check, overwhelmed by the amount and the implications. Why? Why would you do this for strangers? Jake was saved from answering by Emma's return, humming off key as she navigated her crutches. But Sarah saw something flicker across his face, a pain so deep and old that it explained everything and nothing all at once. Because, he said quietly, helping Emma back to her chair, sometimes good people need someone in their corner. As they ate dinner, Emma chattering about her day, and Jake listening with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Sarah found herself studying this complicated man who had walked into their lives. The money was more than generous, it was life-changing. But it also meant accepting help from someone whose past remained largely a mystery. Mr. Jake. Emma's voice interrupted Sarah's thoughts. Are you going to stay until I'm all better? Jake's eyes met Sarah's again, a silent question in his gaze. Sarah looked at the custody papers, at Emma's hopeful face, at the check that could solve so many problems. Yes, Sarah heard herself say. I think Mr. Jake is going to stay. The small block of oak felt warm in Jake's hands as he worked the carving knife with practiced precision. 3 weeks of evening visits had established a comfortable routine. Dinner with Sarah and Emma, help with homework, and then quiet time while Emma watched cartoons and Sarah caught up on paperwork. During these peaceful interludes, Jake had taken to carving, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate work. Emma watched from the couch, fascinated by the gradual emergence of a horse from the shapeless wood. How do you make it look so real? Years of practice. Jake's voice was measured, concentrating on the curve of the horse's neck. My dad taught me when I was about your age. Said working with your hands helped calm a busy mind. Was your dad a soldier too? Jake paused in his carving, remembering calloused hands guiding his smaller ones, the smell of wood shavings in his father's garage workshop. No, he was a carpenter. Built houses, fixed things that were broken. Good man. Sarah looked up from the medical bills she was organizing, noting the wistfulness in Jake's voice. Over the past weeks, she'd learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, the way his jaw tightened when certain topics arose, the careful way he spoke about his past. What happened to him? Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. He died when I was 17. Heart attack. Jake's knife stilled completely. Right after I graduated high school. I was supposed to go to college, but, he shrugged. Life had other plans. Sarah understood the weight behind those simple words. She'd seen enough young men derailed by grief and circumstance to recognize the pattern. Is that when you joined the army? Eventually. Spent a couple years making bad choices first. Jake resumed his carving, the horse's features becoming more defined with each careful stroke. The army straightened me out, gave me purpose. Best decision I ever made. And after the army, Sarah's question was gentle but persistent. Jake's hands stilled again, and Emma sensed the shift in mood with the intuition children possess. "Are you going to make the horse's eyes next?" she asked, unconsciously redirecting the conversation. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Jake smiled at her, grateful for the reprieve. "What color do you think they should be?" "Brown, like chocolate." Emma settled back against her pillows, content to watch the careful work. As Jake carved the delicate details of the horse's face, Sarah found herself studying his profile. The harsh lines of his face softened when he concentrated, revealing glimpses of the gentler man beneath the intimidating exterior. His hands, which she'd initially feared, might be capable of violence, moved with artistic precision and infinite patience. "Tell me about your daughter." The words were out before Sarah could stop them. Jake's knife slipped slightly, creating a small nick in the wood that he immediately began smoothing away. Her name was Lily. His voice was barely above a whisper. She would have been 12 now. Emma looked up from her cartoon, sensing the importance of the moment. Did she like horses? She loved them, always begging me to take her riding, but I kept saying next weekend, or when I get back from this trip. Jake's jaw tightened. There's always something more important until suddenly there isn't any more time. Sarah felt her chest constrict with understanding. The accident. Hit by a drunk driver while I was 3 states away playing weekend warrior with the club. Jake's voice carried years of self-recrimination. She asked for me in the ambulance, kept asking when Daddy was coming home. The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. Sarah had her own experience with receiving phone calls that changed everything, with rushing to hospitals only to arrive too late to say goodbye. Is that why you stopped when you found me? Emma's voice was small but clear. Jake looked at her, this brave little girl who somehow understood the connection between past regrets and present chances. Yes, I couldn't help Lily, but I could help you. I'm glad you did. Emma's simple statement carried the weight of absolute acceptance. And I think Lily would be glad too. Jake blinked rapidly, his hands trembling slightly as he set down the carving knife. The wooden horse was nearly complete, its form elegant and lifelike, despite the small imperfection where his hand had slipped. She would have liked you, he said finally. You're both brave in the same way. Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. Jake's devotion to Emma wasn't just kindness, it was redemption. Through protecting Emma, he was somehow making peace with his failure to protect Lily. Mr. Jake. Emma's voice was drowsy now, the pain medication making her sleepy. When you finish the horse, will you make me something else? What would you like? A family. A daddy horse, a mommy horse, and a little girl horse. So they can all be together. Jake's eyes met Sarah's across the room. And something passed between them, an understanding that their makeshift arrangement was becoming something deeper. More permanent? I think that's a wonderful idea, Sarah said softly. Jake picked up his knife and returned to his work, carving hope into wood one careful stroke at a time. The note was waiting under Jake's windshield wiper when he left the hospital after visiting Emma. 3 words scrawled in familiar handwriting. Time to talk. Below it, an address and a time, no signature needed. Jake recognized Viper's distinctive script immediately. Jake crumpled the paper, his jaw clenching as he scanned the hospital parking lot. They'd found him. After 6 months of careful anonymity, the Crimson Wolves had tracked him down. The timing couldn't be worse, not when Emma was finally healing, not when Sarah was beginning to trust him. He drove to the specified location, an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town, where the club sometimes conducted business they preferred to keep private. The familiar rumble of Harley engines greeted him as he pulled into the empty lot. 5 bikes, their chrome gleaming under the setting sun. Jake recognized them all. Vincent Viper Castellanos stood waiting by the warehouse entrance, his massive frame unmistakable even in the gathering dusk. At 52, he commanded the Crimson Wolves through a combination of ruthless intelligence and carefully calculated violence. His salt and pepper beard was meticulously groomed, his leather cut adorned with patches that told the story of 3 decades in outlaw motorcycle culture. Reaper. Viper's voice carried the same authority it always had. "You're looking soft." Jake dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. The other club members, Snake, Hammer, T-Bone, and Diesel, arranged themselves in a loose semicircle. These men had been his brothers once, bound by blood oaths and shared secrets. Now they felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. Viper. Jake's tone was carefully neutral. "Didn't expect a social call." "This ain't social." Viper's smile was thin and dangerous. "Word is you've been playing house with some woman and her kid. Playing hero at hospitals. That true?" Jake's muscles tensed. "My business is my own now." "See, that's where you're wrong, brother." Viper stepped closer, his presence commanding. "You don't get to just walk away from family. Blood in, blood out. Remember that oath?" "I remember. I also remember when family meant something more than intimidating civilians." Snake, a wiry man with dead eyes, laughed harshly. "Listen to him, Vipe? Gone all righteous on us." "Shut up, Snake." Viper's attention never left Jake. "Here's the thing, Reaper. Club's got some heat right now. Beds are asking questions, and your name keeps coming up in conversations about our past activities. Seems you might be more valuable to them than to us these days." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "I haven't talked to anyone, maybe not yet, but a man with something to lose." Viper's gaze was calculating. "A man with a new family to protect. That man might be tempted to make deals." "You know me better than that. I knew Reaper." "This civilian you've become." Viper shrugged. "This Jake Morrison playing daddy, I don't know him at all." Hammer, a mountain of a man who'd ridden with Jake for 8 years, spoke up. "Vipe, maybe you should shut your mouth and let me handle this." Viper's voice cut like a blade. He turned back to Jake. "Here's what's going to happen. You're coming back to the club tonight. We've got business in Phoenix that requires your particular skills." "I'm done with that life." "No, you're not. Because if you don't get on that bike and ride with us right now, I'm going to pay a visit to your new family. That pretty nurse, what's her name? Sarah? And the little girl." Viper made a show of checking his phone. "Emma Martinez, age 8, room 314 at St. Mary's Hospital." Jake's vision went red. "You stay away from them. Then come home, brother, where you belong." The threat hung in the air like smoke from burning bridges. Jake understood the choice being offered: return to a life he'd tried to escape, or watch innocent people pay for his attempt at redemption. "I need time to think. You've got 24 hours. Viper pulled out his phone and showed Jake a photograph. Sarah leaving the hospital, unaware she was being watched. "After that, we come collecting. One way or another." The other club members mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life in sequence. Viper paused before putting on his helmet. "You were the best enforcer we ever had, Reaper. Natural talent for making problems disappear. It would be a shame to waste that gift on the wrong side of a problem." As the wolves rode away, their tail lights disappearing into the night, Jake stood alone in the empty lot. The threatening note felt like lead in his pocket, its simple message now carrying the weight of everything he'd tried to build. He thought of Emma's trust, of Sarah's growing acceptance, of the wooden horse sitting unfinished on her kitchen table. Then he thought of Viper's reputation for keeping promises, especially the dark ones. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Emma's asking when you're coming by. Hope everything's okay." Everything was far from okay. In 24 hours, Jake would have to choose between the family he'd found and the family he'd tried to leave behind. And he knew from bitter experience that the Crimson Wolves never bluffed. The note crinkled in his fist as he mounted his bike, the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. Jake's cabin sat 15 miles up a winding mountain road, hidden among towering pines and accessible only by those who knew the unmarked turnoff. He'd bought the property with cash 5 years ago, back when he was still running with the wolves and needed a place where club business couldn't follow him home. Now it might be the only thing standing between his makeshift family and Viper's threats. The keys felt heavy in Jake's palm as he stood on Sarah's doorstep at dawn, watching her expression change from sleepy confusion to sharp concern as he explained the situation. "You want us to what?" Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but Jake could see the fear building behind her eyes. "Just for a few days, until I can sort this out." Jake held up the cabin keys, their brass surfaces worn smooth from years of use. "It's safe, remote." They'll never think to look there. Emma appeared in the hallway, balancing on her crutches, with the determination that had become her trademark. Are we going on an adventure? Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Emma, go pack your backpack with books and Mr. Patches. We might be taking a little trip. Is Mr. Jake coming too? Emma's question carried hope and concern in equal measure. Jake knelt to her level, his voice gentle but serious. For a little while, but then I have to take care of some business. Bad business? Emma's 8-year-old intuition was remarkably sharp. Grown-up business. Nothing for you to worry about? As Sarah packed with efficient urgency, Jake found himself studying the small apartment that had become a sanctuary. The hand-carved horse sat on Emma's dresser, nearly complete, except for the final details he'd planned to finish tonight. The custody papers were organized in a neat stack on Sarah's desk, the social services evaluation scheduled for next week, now seeming like a trivial concern compared to immediate physical danger. The drive to the cabin took 2 hours, Sarah following in her sedan, while Jake led the way on his motorcycle. Emma pressed her face against the back window, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to dense forest. When they finally reached the cabin, her excitement was genuine despite the circumstances. It's like a fairy tale house, she exclaimed, taking in the log construction and wraparound porch. Jake carried their bags inside, watching Sarah's reaction to his private space. The cabin was spartanly furnished but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by bookshelves filled with military histories and woodworking manuals. The kitchen was small but well-equipped, and large windows offered views of the surrounding wilderness. You built this? Sarah asked, running her hand along the smooth wooden banister of the stairs leading to the loft bedroom. Most of it. Took me 3 summers. Jake set their bags down carefully. Emma can have the loft. She'll love the skylight for stargazing. You can take the main bedroom, and I'll use the couch. Sarah explored the cabin with professional thoroughness, checking locks, testing the landline phone, noting the well-stocked pantry. How long can we stay here? As long as necessary. Jake opened the refrigerator, mentally cataloging supplies. I've got enough food for a week, generator backup for the power, and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Emma discovered the stone fireplace with delight, already planning marshmallow roasting sessions. Can we make s'mores tonight? Absolutely. Jake managed to smile for her benefit, though Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. That evening, as Emma explored her temporary kingdom in the loft, Sarah and Jake sat by the fire sharing coffee and the weight of unspoken concerns. What happens next? Sarah's question was direct, I go back. Handle this situation before it gets worse. And if you can't handle it? Jake stared into the flames, considering possibilities he didn't want to voice. Then you and Emma stay here until it's safe to leave. The cabin's yours, legally. I had papers drawn up last month. Sarah's eyes widened. Jake, you can't just... I can, and I did. There's an envelope in the kitchen drawer with all the documentation. If something happens to me, this place becomes yours, free and clear. The magnitude of his gesture hit Sarah like a physical blow. Why would you do that? Because Emma needs security. Because you've given me something I didn't think I deserved. Jake's voice was rough with emotion. Because for the first time in 5 years, I understand what I should have been fighting for all along. From the loft came the sound of Emma's voice, talking to Mr. Patches as she settled in for the night. The innocent chatter was a stark contrast to the adult fears being discussed below. Promise me something, Sarah said quietly. Anything. Promise me you'll come back. Emma's already lost too many people who mattered to her. Jake met her eyes across the flickering firelight. I promise I'll try. That's not good enough. It's all I can honestly give you. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that some promises were impossible to make with certainty. Then try harder than you've ever tried for anything in your life. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the darkness. The cabin keys lay on the mantel between them, a symbol of sanctuary that might become either temporary refuge or permanent gift, depending on what Jake faced when he returned to the world below. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's kitchen window as Sarah set 3 mismatched plates on the small wooden table. The shared breakfast table, scarred from years of use but solid and welcoming, had become the heart of their temporary home. Emma sat carefully balanced on a cushioned chair, her casted leg propped on another seat, while Jake prepared pancakes at the stove with the concentrated attention of a man grateful for simple tasks. "These smell like the ones Mama used to make," Emma said. Watching Jake flip a perfect golden circle in the cast-iron pan. "Secret ingredient," Jake replied, winking at her. "Vanilla extract." "Just a little bit." Sarah poured orange juice into plastic cups, noting how naturally they'd fallen into domestic routines over the past 3 days. Jake rose before dawn to check the perimeter, returning to start coffee and breakfast. Sarah helped Emma with her physical therapy exercises, and Emma entertained them both with elaborate stories featuring Mr. Patches as the hero of various adventures. "Mr. Jake, will you teach me to carve wood like you do?" Emma asked, accepting a stack of pancakes with serious concentration. "When your arm gets stronger, carving requires steady hands and patience." Jake settled at the table, his large frame somehow fitting naturally into the intimate space. "But I could start teaching you about different types of wood, how to choose the right piece for what you want to make." Sarah watched this exchange with growing wonder. Jake's patience with Emma seemed limitless, his answers thoughtful and age-appropriate. She'd seen too many men who claimed to like children, but lost interest when faced with the reality of constant questions and need for attention. "Could I carve something for Aunt Sarah?" Emma's question was directed at Jake, but her eyes sought Sarah's approval. "What would you want to make?" Sarah asked, touched by the consideration. "A heart. Because you take care of people's hearts at the hospital, and you take care of my heart, too." The simple statement hit Sarah with unexpected force. She'd been so focused on providing practical care, food, shelter, medical needs, that she'd forgotten about the emotional healing they'd all been doing together. "I think that's a beautiful idea," Jake said softly. "Hearts are tricky to carve, but I know you could do it." After breakfast, they established their daily rhythm. Emma settled on the couch with books and puzzles, while Jake split firewood outside and Sarah organized their temporary household. The domestic normalcy felt surreal given the circumstances, but also precious in its simplicity. "He's different here," Emma observed when Jake stepped outside to stack the split wood. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked up from the medical journal she was reading, part of her continuing education requirements. "Happier, less worried. Like when Mr. Patches feels safe in my arms instead of being scared." Emma's metaphor was startlingly accurate. "Do you think he wants to stay with us forever?" Sarah considered how to answer honestly without creating false hopes. "I think Mr. Jake cares about us very much. But sometimes grown-ups have complicated situations that make it hard to do what they want because of the bad men." Sarah's breath caught. They'd been careful not to discuss the specific threat, but Emma's intuition was sharp. "Yes, because of some problems from his past." "Will the bad men come here?" "No, sweetheart. Mr. Jake made sure we're safe here." Emma nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance children show when trusted adults provide reassurance. But Sarah could see her processing the information, filing it away with other hard truths about the world's capacity for unexpected danger. When Jake returned, carrying an armload of split oak, Emma greeted him with a question that stopped him cold. "Mr. Jake, do you love Aunt Sarah?" Jake nearly dropped the firewood, his face flushing red above his beard. Sarah felt her own cheeks warm as she waited for his response. "Emma, that's a very personal question," Sarah began, but Jake held up a gentle hand. "It's okay." He set down the wood and knelt beside Emma's chair, meeting her eyes with the honesty he'd always shown her. "Yes, I do love your Aunt Sarah, and I love you too very much. Like a family loves?" "Yes, like a family," Emma beamed with satisfaction. "Good, because we love you too, don't we, Aunt Sarah?" Sarah found herself caught between embarrassment and truth, aware that Emma's directness had forced a conversation they'd been carefully avoiding. Jake's grey eyes met hers across the small space, vulnerable and hopeful. "Yes," Sarah heard herself say. "We do love you, Jake." The admission hung in the air like morning mist, fragile and transformative. Jake's smile was soft and genuine, the kind of expression Sarah suspected he rarely allowed himself. "So we're a family now?" Emma's question was pragmatic, as if love naturally led to such arrangements. "We're something special," Jake said carefully. "What we call it matters less than how we take care of each other." Emma nodded approvingly and returned to her coloring, apparently satisfied with this definition. Sarah and Jake remained looking at each other across the breakfast table, the shared acknowledgement of love changing everything and nothing all at once. Outside, a cardinal landed on the kitchen windowsill, its red feathers bright against the green forest backdrop. For this moment, they were simply three people who'd found each other, sharing breakfast and planning their day, letting themselves believe that love might be enough to overcome whatever came next. Jake found the GPS tracker while checking his motorcycle before the morning supply run. The small black device was magnetically attached to the underside of his gas tank, its red LED blinking steadily like a digital heartbeat. His blood ran cold as he recognized the military-grade tracking equipment, the kind the wolves used for high-value surveillance operations. They'd found him. Jake pried the tracker loose with his pocket knife, resisting the urge to crush it immediately. If he destroyed it now, they'd know he'd discovered there. Surveillance, better to let them think they still had the advantage while he figured out his next move. The device felt warm in his palm as he walked back to the cabin, his mind racing through possibilities. How long had they been tracking him? Hours, days? Long enough to map his routes, identify the cabin's location, catalogue his patterns. Sarah was reading to Emma on the couch when he entered, her voice steady and soothing as she worked through a chapter of Charlotte's Web. Emma's eyes were heavy with morning medication, but she fought sleep to hear the story's end. "I need to make a phone call," Jake said quietly, not wanting to alarm Emma. Sarah's eyes sharpened with concern at his tone. "Everything okay?" "Just checking on some things." Jake forced his voice to remain calm. "I'll be right outside." The call was to Tommy Mouse Rodriguez, a small man with an electronics background who'd left the Wolves 2 years ago to run a legitimate auto repair shop. Mouse owed Jake several favors from their time together, debts that transcended club loyalty. "Reaper? Jesus, man, I heard you went straight." Mouse's voice was cautious. "I did. That's why I'm calling. I need information." "About what?" Jake described the tracker, reading off the model number etched into its plastic casing. Mouse was quiet for a long moment. "That's serious hardware, Jake. Military contractor stuff." "Where'd you find it?" "My bike." "How long's the battery life?" 2 weeks, maybe 3 if they're conserving power. Real-time GPS with cellular uplink." Mouse paused. "Jake, whoever's tracking you isn't playing games. Can you disable it remotely?" "Not without specialized equipment. But I might know someone who can help." "Give me an hour." Jake ended the call and stared at the tracker in his palm. 2 weeks. They'd been watching him for 2 weeks, which meant they knew about the cabin, about Sarah and Emma, about everything he'd tried to keep separate from his old life. Inside, Emma had fallen asleep against Sarah's shoulder. Sarah gently shifted her to a more comfortable position, then joined Jake on the porch. "What's wrong?" she asked directly. Jake showed her the device. "They've been tracking me." "Probably know about this place." Sarah's face went pale. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. Could be minutes, could be hours." Jake pocketed the tracker. "We need to leave now. Where can we go?" "I have a friend with a ranch about 50 miles south. Former Marine, doesn't ask questions. We'll be safe there while I figure out our next move." Sarah was already moving toward the cabin. "I'll pack our things, just the essentials. We leave in 10 minutes. As Sarah gathered their belongings with military efficiency, Jake performed a final security check of the cabin. He disabled the main breaker to darken the windows, set timers on several lamps to create the illusion of occupancy, and activated the wireless security cameras he'd installed last year. Emma woke as they carried her to Sarah's car, her casted leg making the transfer awkward. "Are we going home now?" "We're going to visit some friends," Sarah said, buckling Emma's seatbelt with practiced ease. "Another adventure? Will Mr. Jake come too?" "He'll follow us," Sarah assured her, though Jake could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Jake mounted his motorcycle, the tracker still attached but now accompanied by a small signal jammer Mouse had talked him through building. It would create enough interference to make their location fuzzy without completely killing the signal. As they drove away from the cabin, Jake watched the rear-view mirrors constantly. The mountain road offered good visibility, but limited escape routes. If the wolves had set up surveillance, this would be the perfect place for an ambush. 20 miles down the mountain, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice try with the jammer, Reaper. But we're already closer than you think," Jake's heart hammered as he scanned the road ahead. In the distance, he caught the glint of chrome and the low rumble of multiple motorcycles approaching from the opposite direction. He flashed his headlight at Sarah's car, their prearranged signal for danger. In his mirror, he saw her brake lights as she pulled into a scenic overlook. Just as they'd planned, the wolves were coming, and there was nowhere left to run. Jake dismounted his bike and walked to Sarah's window. Change of plans. There's a hiking trail about a quarter-mile back. Take Emma and follow it into the woods. Stay off the main path and don't come back until you hear my bike engine. Jake, no. We stick together. Not this time. Jake's voice was firm. This is my fight, and I won't let them hurt you. He pressed the cabin keys into her hand once more, their metal warm from his palm. If something happens to me, those still work. The cabin's still yours. The sound of approaching motorcycles grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like approaching thunder. Emma's hand-drawn map was created on the back of a gas station receipt during their desperate flight south. Using a purple crayon from her backpack, she carefully sketched their route with the earnest concentration of a child turning fear into something manageable. Mountains became triangular peaks, the winding highway transformed into a friendly snake, and Jake's motorcycle appeared as a protective guardian angel with wings. "This is where we started," Emma explained to Sarah from the back seat, pointing to a small cabin she'd drawn with a heart-shaped chimney. "And this is where the bad men were." She marked several angry scribbles along the road. "But see, Mr. Jake led us away from them." Sarah glanced at the map through the rearview mirror, touched by Emma's need to document their journey. The child's artistic interpretation made their terrifying escape seem like an adventure story, complete with heroes and villains clearly defined. They'd been driving for 3 hours, taking back roads and farm routes that Jake knew from his trucking days before the army. The plan was to reach his friend Marcus Rivera's ranch before nightfall, but the detours were adding time they might not have. Jake's motorcycle stayed visible in Sarah's mirrors, sometimes pulling ahead to scout for trouble, sometimes falling back to watch for pursuit. At each crossroads, he'd signal their next turn with practiced hand gestures, leading them deeper into rural Texas, where the wolves would have trouble operating without attracting local attention. "Are we almost there?" Emma asked, adding a stick-figure representation of herself to the map. She gave herself a cape and a magic wand, transforming from victim to heroine in the space of a crayon stroke. "Soon, sweetheart." Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. The adrenaline of their escape was wearing off, replaced by the exhaustion of sustained fear. Every car that appeared in her mirrors could be a threat, every junction a potential ambush point. Emma added more details to her map: a smiling sun, fluffy clouds, and a rainbow that arced over their entire journey. "Mr. Jake looks sad," she observed, glancing out the window at his hunched figure on the motorcycle. "He's concentrating on keeping us safe, but his shoulders are droopy, like when Mr. Patches is worried about something." Emma's observation was painfully accurate. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the tension in Jake's posture, the way he continuously scanned their surroundings for threats. The weight of protecting them was wearing on him visibly. They stopped for gas at a small station outside Fredericksburg, Jake parking his bike where he could watch all approaches while Sarah filled the tank. Emma remained in the car, adding final touches to her map and humming quietly to herself. "How much further?" Sarah asked when Jake approached. 20 miles. "Marcus doesn't know we're coming, but he'll help." Jake's voice was rough with fatigue. "He's good people. Marine Corps. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Understands complicated situations." And after that, Jake was quiet for a moment, watching Emma through the car window as she carefully colored in the wings on his motorcycle angel. "I don't know. This can't go on indefinitely. Eventually I'll have to face them directly. We'll face them together." "No!" Jake's voice was firm. "This is my past, my responsibility. I won't let you and Emma pay for my mistakes." Sarah wanted to argue, but the arrival of a pickup truck at the adjacent pump made them both tense. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, then relaxed when the driver emerged. An elderly rancher focused only on filling his tank. "We should go," Jake said quietly. The final 20 miles took them through rolling hill country, dotted with cattle ranches and old oak trees. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, her map clutched in one hand and Mr. Patches in the other. The crayon drawing fluttered slightly in the air conditioning, its cheerful colors a stark contrast to the gravity of their situation. The Rivera Ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a sprawling operation with white-fenced pastures and a modest farmhouse surrounded by mature pecans. Marcus Rivera was waiting on the porch as they pulled up the gravel drive. Alerted by the security system Jake had helped him install years ago, Marcus was a compact man in his 50s, his weathered face bearing the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with solitude and self-reliance. He greeted Jake with a firm handshake and careful assessment of Sarah and Emma. "You bringing trouble to my door, Jake?" "Trying to keep it away from innocent people." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then you're welcome as long as necessary. House has plenty of room, and I could use the company." As they unloaded their few belongings, Emma woke and presented her map to Marcus with solemn pride. "This shows how Mr. Jake saved us from the bad men." Marcus studied the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. "That's some fine artistic work, young lady. Mind if I hang this on my refrigerator? It'll make the kitchen more colorful." Emma beamed with pleasure, and Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Whatever came next, they'd found another safe harbor, another person willing to stand between them and the storm. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in a guest room decorated with Marcus's late wife's quilts, Sarah found Jake and Marcus on the porch, sharing beer and planning defensive strategies with the casual competence of men who'd faced worse odds before. "Tomorrow," Jake said quietly, "I'm going to end this." Jake wrote the confession letter by lamplight in Marcus's study, his normally steady handwriting betraying the emotion behind each carefully chosen word. The 3 pages contained everything he couldn't bring himself to say aloud: his love for Sarah and Emma, his regrets about his past, and his determination to protect them, regardless of the cost to himself. "My dearest Sarah and Emma," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I won't be coming back from the choice I have to make today." He paused, pen hovering over the paper as he searched for words adequate to express 5 years of accumulated regret and 3 months of unexpected joy. Through the study window, he could see the guest room where Emma slept peacefully, Mr. Patches tucked securely under her arm. In the room next door, Sarah was finally resting after 2 days of sustained fear. "Sarah, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, the chance to be the man I should have been all along. You saw past the tattoos and the reputation to find whatever goodness was left in me. I hope someday you'll understand that leaving you both is the only way I know to keep you safe." Jake's throat tightened as he continued writing, explaining his decision to face the wolves alone. He detailed his financial arrangements. The cabin was legally theirs, along with his savings account and the small trust fund he'd established for Emma's education. He'd spent the morning making phone calls to lawyers and banks, ensuring that his death wouldn't leave them financially vulnerable. "Emma, my brave little girl, you taught me that families aren't just born, they're chosen. You chose me when you had every reason to be afraid, and that gift changed everything. The wooden horse on your dresser isn't finished, but maybe that's okay. Some things are more beautiful when we use our imagination to complete them." The confession continued with details about his past that he'd never shared: his daughter Lily's death, his guilt over choosing the club over family, the violence he'd participated in before finding the strength to walk away. He wanted them to understand why he couldn't simply ignore Viper's threats, why running would only delay the inevitable confrontation. "I know you'll want to remember me as the man who helped you, but I need you to know the truth about who I was before I met you. I've done things I can never undo, hurt people who didn't deserve it, chosen loyalty to criminals over duty to innocent victims. The man you love is real, but he exists because you believed he could. Jake sealed the letter in an envelope addressed to both Sarah and Emma, leaving it on Marcus's desk, where it would be found if he didn't return. He'd written similar letters before dangerous missions in Afghanistan, but this felt different, more final, more important. Dawn was breaking over the ranch as Jake prepared his motorcycle for what might be his last ride. Marcus appeared with coffee and the tactical vest Jake had requested, military-grade protection that might make the difference in what was coming. "You sure about this plan?" Marcus asked, his Marine training evident. In the way he assessed Jake's preparations, it's the only way to end this without Emma and Sarah getting hurt. Jake checked his weapons. One final time, the .45 caliber pistol he'd carried since his army days, and the knife his father had given him for his 16th birthday. Viper won't stop until he gets what he wants. Better to face him on ground of my choosing. Where? The old quarry outside Blanco. Isolated, good sight lines, only one way in or out. If things go bad, at least the damage will be contained. Marcus nodded grimly. What do you want me to tell them? That I kept my promise. That I tried. Jake mounted his Harley, the engine's rumble shattering the peaceful morning quiet. He'd called Viper an hour ago, agreeing to meet at noon for a final conversation. The quarry held memories from his early days with the club, initiation rituals, punishment ceremonies, the kind of business conducted far from witnesses. As he rode away from the ranch, Jake didn't look back at the guest room windows. He couldn't afford the distraction of seeing Sarah's face or Emma's sleeping form. The letter contained everything he needed them to know. The confession weighed on him like a physical burden as he rode toward what might be his last stand. He'd spent his adult life running from accountability, but Emma's trust and Sarah's love had taught him that some things were worth facing head-on. 20 miles from the ranch, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Viper. "Hope you're ready to come home, brother. We've got so much catching up to do." Jake deleted the message and continued riding toward the quarry, carrying with him the memory of Emma's laughter and Sarah's gentle touch, along with the knowledge that some debts could only be paid with everything you had to give. The morning sun climbed higher as he approached the crossroads where his old life and new hope would finally collide. The bloody gang patch lay in the quarry dust like a discarded flag of surrender. Jake had torn it from Viper's jacket during their brutal fight, the fabric still warm with blood from split knuckles and rage that had been building for 6 months. The Crimson Wolves logo, once a symbol of brotherhood and belonging, now represented everything Jake had finally found the strength to leave behind. Viper circled him like a predator, his face swollen and bleeding, but his eyes still burning with the fury of absolute authority challenged. The other club members, Snake, Hammer, T-Bone, and Diesel, formed a loose ring around the combatants, their expressions torn between loyalty to their president and grudging respect for Jake's refusal to back down. "You always were stubborn, Reaper," Viper spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "But this ends now. You come back to the club, or we visit your new family tonight." Jake's tactical vest had absorbed most of Viper's initial assault, but his ribs ached from body shots, and his left eye was swelling shut. Still, he remained standing, his military training and desperate determination keeping him upright when lesser motivation would have failed. "The only thing ending here is your hold over me," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the pain. "I'm done being your weapon. Mouse!" Viper's shout echoed off the quarry walls. "Get over here and help me finish this." But Thomas Mouse Rodriguez remained motionless on his motorcycle, his small frame tense with internal conflict. Jake had saved Mouse's life during a bar fight 3 years ago, pulling him out of a situation that would have ended badly. Now the debt was coming due in ways none of them had anticipated. "I can't do it, Vipe," Mouse said quietly. "Jake's a good man, better than the rest of us." Viper's rage shifted targets instantly. "You forget who you serve, Mouse. Blood in, blood out. That's the code. The code's supposed to protect family, not destroy it." Mouse's voice grew stronger. "Jake found something worth fighting for. Maybe we should let him have it," Snake laughed harshly. "Listen to them, Vipe, going soft like a bunch of civilians." But Hammer, the massive enforcer who'd ridden with Jake through countless dangerous situations, stepped forward with surprising gentleness. "Viper, maybe Mouse has a point. Jake did his time, paid his dues. He wants out clean. Maybe we should let him go. Nobody gets out clean. Viper's voice cracked with absolute authority. The club is family. Family doesn't abandon family. Jake straightened despite his injuries, drawing on reserves of strength he'd thought were exhausted. Family doesn't threaten innocent children. Family doesn't force brothers to choose between love and loyalty. You chose a nurse and some kid over 15 years of brotherhood. I chose the chance to be better than what I was. Jake's voice carried conviction that surprised even him. I chose to protect instead of destroy, to build instead of tear down. That's not betrayal. That's growth. Viper pulled his knife, the blade glinting in the afternoon sun. Enough philosophy. You're coming back with us, or you're staying here permanently. The attack came fast and vicious, Viper's experience with bladed combat evident in every controlled slash. Jake deflected with his forearms, feeling fabric and skin part under the razor edge. But he managed to catch Viper's wrist and twist until the knife clattered across the rocks. What followed was raw and brutal, two men fighting not just for dominance but for fundamentally different visions of what strength meant. Viper fought to maintain his authority, to prove that loyalty to the club superseded all other considerations. Jake fought for the right to choose love over fear, hope over violence. When Jake finally pinned Viper to the ground, both men were bleeding and exhausted. The club president's eyes held something Jake had never seen before. Defeat. It's over, Vipe, Jake said quietly. I'm walking away, and you're going to let me go. Viper stared up at him for a long moment, then began laughing despite his split lip. You think this ends anything? You think you can just walk away from what you are? I already have. Jake stood slowly, every muscle protesting. He reached for the Crimson Wolves patch on his own jacket, the one he'd carried for 15 years, through good times and bad. With deliberate ceremony, he tore it free and dropped it beside Viper's in the dust. Anyone who wants to visit Emma or Sarah will answer to me personally, Jake announced to the assembled club members. And I promise you, I'm much more dangerous now than I ever was as your enforcer. Mouse nodded slowly. Message received, brother. One by one, the other club members mounted their motorcycles. Only Viper remained on the ground, staring at the two patches lying in the quarry dust like shed skin from a previous life. As Jake walked toward his own bike, Mouse rode up alongside him. For what it's worth, Reaper, I think you made the right choice. Thanks. A mouse. That means something. Jake started his Harley and rode away from the quarry without looking back, leaving his bloody gang patch behind, like a gravestone, marking the death of who he used to be. Emma's family drawing covered an entire sheet of construction paper, created with the focused intensity of a child, processing complex emotions through art. She'd used every crayon in her box to capture what she saw as their perfect unit. Jake stood tall in the center wearing his leather jacket, but with a gentle smile. Sarah beside him in her nurse's scrubs, with arms outstretched protectively, and Emma herself between them holding Mr. Patches, all three figures surrounded by a heart-shaped border decorated with flowers. This is us, Emma announced proudly, presenting the drawing to Jake as he sat on Marcus's porch, his face still bearing colorful bruises from the quarry confrontation. This is our family. Jake accepted the artwork with hands that trembled slightly, not from his injuries, but from the overwhelming emotion of seeing himself depicted as someone worthy of love and belonging. In Emma's 8-year-old perspective, his scars and tattoos didn't define him. His place in their hearts did. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. Jake's voice was rough with emotion as he studied every detail. Emma had drawn tiny hearts floating around all three figures, and she'd given him angel wings, similar to the ones in her travel map. Sarah emerged from the house carrying medical supplies, her nurse's training evident in the efficient way she'd been treating Jake's injuries over the past week. The confrontation with the wolves had left him battered but victorious, and more importantly, it had finally freed him from the threat that had shadowed their relationship. Time for your bandage change, Sarah announced, settling beside Jake on the porch swing. And don't even think about arguing. Doctor's orders. Emma positioned herself cross-legged on the wooden deck. watching Sarah's careful ministrations with the fascination children show for medical procedures. Die Albertine. Does it hurt, Mr. Jake? Not as much as it did, Jake replied honestly. Your Aunt Sarah has magic healing hands. That's what Mama used to say about nurses, Emma said matter-of-factly. That they're like angels, but they get to stay on Earth to help people. Sarah's hand stilled for a moment on Jake's bandages, touched by the innocent wisdom. Your Mama was a smart woman. Over the past week, they'd established new routines that felt more permanent than their previous arrangements. Marcus had offered them indefinite sanctuary at the ranch, genuinely enjoying the companionship after years of solitude. Emma was thriving in the rural environment, her leg healing well, and her spirits higher than Sarah had seen since the accident. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the traveling therapist who'd been working with Emma, had visited the ranch twice and declared herself impressed with the child's emotional progress. Having stable, loving adults in her life is the best medicine, she'd told Sarah during their last session. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Jake had been attending his own therapy sessions via video calls, working through decades of unresolved trauma with a counselor who specialized in veterans transitioning from high-stress environments. The process was difficult but necessary, helping him understand that his past didn't have to define his future. Mr. Jake, will you help me write a letter? Emma asked, adding final touches to her family drawing. Sure, sweetheart. What kind of letter? To the judge lady. To tell her we're a real family now, and she doesn't need to worry about me anymore. Sarah's breath caught. The social services evaluation had been postponed due to their unusual circumstances, but Emma's caseworker had been remarkably understanding, given the dramatic improvement in her living situation and emotional state. That's a wonderful idea, Jake said carefully. What do you want to tell her? Emma considered this seriously. That I have a daddy now who teaches me to carve wood and keeps the bad dreams away. And that Aunt Sarah doesn't cry anymore when she thinks I'm sleeping, and that we're happy. The simple statement carried profound truth. Sarah had noticed the change in herself as much as in Emma. The constant stress of single parenthood had lifted now that she had a true partner in Jake, someone who shared both the responsibilities and the joys of raising Emma. I think that's exactly what she needs to hear. Sarah agreed, her voice thick with emotion. That evening, as Emma worked on coloring another picture at the kitchen table, Sarah and Jake sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. She drew us as a family, Sarah said quietly, referring to Emma's artwork. Is that what we are? Jake's question was tentative, still uncertain about his place in their lives, despite everything they'd been through together. I think we've been a family for a while now. We just needed time to recognize it, Jake nodded slowly, understanding that love wasn't always about dramatic declarations. Sometimes it was about choosing each other every day, showing up consistently, creating safety and stability through small acts of devotion. In the kitchen, Emma's voice carried through the open window as she narrated her latest artistic creation to Mr. Patches, describing a house with a big yard where they could all live together forever. Her innocent certainty about their future was both touching and inspiring, a reminder that sometimes children see possibilities that adults are too scared to imagine. I love you, Sarah, Jake said simply. I love you too. We both do. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the doorway holding her completed family portrait. Can we put this on the refrigerator? So everyone knows we belong together. The wedding ring hidden in Jake's wooden jewelry box had belonged to his grandmother, a simple band of white gold that represented generations of enduring love. He'd carried it through his military service and his years with the club, somehow managing to keep it safe despite the chaos that had defined his adult life. Now, as he held it up to the morning light in Marcus's workshop, he wondered if he was worthy of the promise it represented. It's beautiful, Marcus said, examining the ring with the appreciation of someone who understood both craftsmanship and sentiment. Your grandmother had good taste. She wore it for 63 years. Never took it off, not even when Grandpa was overseas during Korea. Jake turned the ring slowly, remembering his grandmother's weathered hands and the way she'd twist the band when she was nervous or thinking. I always figured if I ever found the right woman, I'd want her to have something with that kind of history. Marcus nodded approvingly. Sarah seems like the type who'd appreciate the meaning behind it. Jake had been working in Marcus's shop for the past month, earning his keep by helping with ranch maintenance and equipment repair. The physical work felt good after weeks of emotional upheaval, and Marcus's easy companionship reminded him of the best parts of military brotherhood without the complications of club loyalty. The legal proceedings had been surprisingly straightforward. Sarah's custody of Emma was formalized without challenge, especially after character witness statements from Dr. Hendricks, Marcus, and even Deputy Coleman, who'd been impressed by Jake's transformation from suspected criminal to devoted family man. Jake's own legal situation was more complex, but a combination of his military service record and cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in immunity for past club activities in exchange for testimony about the Wolves' criminal enterprises. You nervous about asking her? Marcus inquired, noting Jake's careful handling of the ring. Terrified, Jake admitted. I've faced down armed insurgents and motorcycle gang enforcers, but the thought of proposing to Sarah makes my hands shake. Good, means you understand what's at stake. Through the workshop window, they could see Emma playing in the yard with the ranch's border collie, her cast finally removed and her mobility fully restored. Her laughter carried on the warm afternoon breeze, a sound that never failed to make Jake smile. Sarah appeared in the doorway carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, her hair pulled back in a ponytail and her face relaxed in a way Jake had rarely seen during their early days together. The constant stress of single parenthood had been replaced by the shared confidence of true partnership. "What are you two conspiring about?" she asked, noting their serious expressions. "Just discussing some woodworking techniques," Jake replied, quickly pocketing the ring. "Marcus is teaching me about inlay work." Sarah's smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his explanation, but she didn't press. Over the months, she'd learned to trust Jake's timing with important conversations. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Jake felt the weight of the ring in his pocket like a tangible reminder of possibilities. Emma's joyful shouts filled the air as she tried to catch the dancing lights, her 8-year-old exuberance undimmed by everything she'd endured. "I've been thinking about our future," Jake said carefully. "What about it?" Sarah's voice was curious but unguarded. "About making it official, legal, permanent." Sarah turned to face him fully, her expression serious but hopeful. "What exactly are you saying?" Jake pulled the ring box from his pocket, his hands surprisingly steady now that the moment had arrived. "I'm saying I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the trust you and Emma have placed in me. I'm saying I love you both more than I thought possible. And I can't imagine a future that doesn't include waking up every morning knowing we're a family." Emma, still chasing fireflies, suddenly stopped and turned toward the porch as if sensing the importance of the moment. Her face lit up with understanding and delight. "Are you asking Aunt Sarah to marry you?" she called out, abandoning her firefly hunt entirely. "Yes, I am," Jake replied, opening the ring box to reveal his grandmother's band. "If she'll have me." Sarah stared at the ring, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Jake, it's beautiful. But are you sure? Marriage is a big step, and with Emma to consider, especially with Emma to consider," Jake interrupted gently. "She deserves a stable home with parents who are committed to each other and to her. She deserves the kind of family I never thought I'd be lucky enough to have." Emma ran up the porch steps, barely containing her excitement. "Say yes, Aunt Sarah." "Say yes." Sarah laughed through her tears, looking between Jake's hopeful face and Emma's eager expression. "How can I argue with both of you?" "Is that a yes?" Jake asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That's definitely a yes." As Jake slipped his grandmother's ring onto Sarah's finger, Emma threw her arms around both of them, creating a 3-way hug that felt like the most natural thing in the world. The fireflies continued their ancient dance around them, tiny lights celebrating the moment when 3 separate hearts became one unbreakable family. Emma's handmade card was a masterpiece of 8-year-old artistry, created with construction paper, glitter glue, and the unwavering determination of a child with a mission. The front featured a drawing of Jake and Sarah holding hands under a rainbow, with "Will you marry Aunt Sarah?" spelled out in careful block letters, decorated with heart stickers. Inside, Emma had written in her best cursive, "Dear Mr. Jake, you should ask Aunt Sarah to marry you because you both smile more when you're together and families should be forever. Love, Emma, your almost daughter." Jake discovered the card on his workbench in Marcus's shop, positioned carefully next to his morning coffee where he couldn't possibly miss it. Emma's matchmaking efforts had been growing bolder over the past week, including pointed comments about how nice it would be to have the same last name and subtle questions about when grown-ups decided to get married. "Emma, did you leave this for me?" Jake called toward the house, though her giggles from the kitchen already provided his answer. "Maybe," came her innocent reply, followed by whispered conversation with Sarah that Jake couldn't quite make out. Jake studied the card more carefully, touched by Emma's earnest advocacy for their relationship. The 8-year-old had appointed herself chief romantic strategist, apparently deciding that adult hesitation was simply a problem requiring childhood intervention. That afternoon, as they prepared for their weekly grocery trip to town, Emma positioned herself strategically between Jake and Sarah in the truck's front seat, her crutches finally relegated to storage after months of careful healing. "Mr. Jake, when you were little, did you ever want to get married?" Emma's question seemed casual, but Jake recognized the calculated innocence in her tone. "I thought about it sometimes. When I met the right person." "And have you met the right person now?" Sarah tried to hide her smile as Jake navigated this careful questioning. "What do you think, Emma?" "I think you love Aunt Sarah, and she loves you, and I love both of you, so that makes us a family already. But Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store always asks if we're married, and I don't know what to say." "What would you like to say?" Sarah asked gently. Emma considered this seriously. "I'd like to say that you're my mom, and Mr. Jake is my dad, and we live together because we choose to, not just because we have to." The simple statement hit both adults with surprising force. Emma had articulated what they'd all been feeling but hadn't quite managed to put into words, the desire to transform their practical arrangement into something chosen and permanent. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Jake said quietly. "So when are you going to ask her?" Emma's patience with adult subtlety had apparently reached its limit. Sarah laughed despite herself. "Emma, you can't just order people to get engaged." "Why not?" "You ordered Mr. Jake to change his bandages and eat vegetables, and that worked out fine." Jake pulled into the grocery store parking lot, using the activity of finding a space to cover his emotional response to Emma's logic. The child's perspective was refreshingly direct. If you loved someone and wanted to spend your life with them, why wait for some perfect moment that might never come? Inside the store, Emma appointed herself wedding coordinator, steering their cart toward the magazine rack where she studied bridal publications with scientific intensity. "Look, they have dresses with long trains and short trains and no trains at all," she announced, showing Sarah a glossy photo spread. "Which kind do you like best?" "Emma, we're not exactly shopping for wedding dresses today, but we could be, if someone would just ask the right question." Emma's pointed look at Jake was anything but subtle. Jake found himself studying Sarah as she pretended to focus on their shopping list. Her hair was pulled back in its practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, and she moved through the store with the efficient grace of someone managing multiple responsibilities. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was home. "Emma," Jake said suddenly, "do you really think I should ask Aunt Sarah to marry me?" "Yes." Emma's enthusiasm was immediate and wholehearted. "Today, right now." "Right now." "In the grocery store." "Why not?" "This is where we buy food for our family dinners. This is where Mrs. Henderson always asks if we're married. This is where we learned that Aunt Sarah likes the expensive ice cream, but only buys it when you're paying." Sarah blushed at this last observation. "Emma, you're not supposed to notice things like that." "I notice everything. I notice that Mr. Jake always carries the heavy bags, so you don't have to. I notice that you save him the last piece of pie, even when you want it. I notice that you both check on me at night, even though you think I'm sleeping. Emma pulled her handmade card from her backpack and pressed it into Jake's hands. I made this because sometimes grown-ups need help remembering what's important. Mrs. Peterson says that love is an action word, not just a feeling word. So maybe it's time for some action. Jake looked at the card, then at Sarah's expectant face, then at Emma's hopeful expression. In the middle of the cereal aisle, surrounded by the mundane reality of weekly shopping, he realized that perfect moments weren't about perfect settings, they were about perfect certainty. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying across the everyday chaos of grocery shopping, "will you marry me?" The new family photo sat in a place of honor on the mantel of their small house near Emma's school, its silver frame catching the afternoon light as 10-year-old Emma carefully dusted around it with the thoroughness of a child who understood the value of precious things. The photograph had been taken 6 months after the wedding, showing Jake in his best suit, with his arm around Sarah in her simple white dress, while Emma stood between them wearing a pale yellow flower girl dress and the biggest smile she'd ever produced for a camera. "Tell me about the wedding again," Emma requested, settling into her favorite spot on the couch where she could see both the photo and her parents' faces as they shared the story she never tired of hearing. Sarah looked up from the stack of papers she was grading. Night school had earned her a degree in education, and she now taught part-time at Emma's elementary school while maintaining her nursing shifts at the hospital. "Which part do you want to hear about?" "All of it, from the beginning." Jake closed his woodworking magazine and moved to the couch, making room for Emma between him and Sarah. This had become their evening ritual. Homework completed, dinner finished, and time for the stories that reinforced their family history. "Well," Jake began, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence Emma loved. "It was a very small wedding. Just us, Marcus, Dr. Hendricks, and Judge Martinez in the courthouse garden. And me," Emma added importantly. "I was the flower girl and the ring bearer and the best man all together." "You were the most important person there," Sarah agreed, smoothing Emma's dark hair. "Because none of it would have happened without you." Emma beamed with pride at this familiar acknowledgement of her role in bringing them together. The child who had once whispered, "Please don't hurt me," to a stranger on a lonely road had grown into a confident 10-year-old who understood that families could be built from love and choice, as much as biology. And then what happened? Emma prompted, though she knew every detail by heart. "Then Judge Martinez said the words that made us officially a family," Jake continued. "And when he asked if there were any objections, you raised your hand." Emma giggled at the memory. "I said there was one very important objection, that nobody had asked me if I wanted Jake to be my daddy." "And what did you tell the judge?" Sarah asked, playing her part in the familiar script. "I told him that I'd been wanting a daddy for a very long time, and Jake was exactly the right one, because he knew how to fix broken things and make them beautiful again." Jake's throat tightened, as it always did at this part of the story. Emma's words that day had been unscripted and heartfelt, reducing several of the courthouse staff to tears and cementing what everyone already knew, that their unconventional family was bound by something stronger than law or convention. "And then we all cried happy tears," Emma continued, "and Judge Martinez said he'd never performed a wedding with a flower girl who gave a speech, but he thought it was perfect." The house around them bore evidence of their 3 years together. Jake's hand-carved furniture mixed with Sarah's practical decorating, Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator, and photographs documenting birthdays, school plays, and quiet family moments. The mortgage was in both Sarah and Jake's names. The adoption papers that made Emma legally his daughter were framed in his workshop, and the life insurance policies listed each other as beneficiaries with the matter-of-fact certainty of people who plan to grow old together. "Do you know what my favorite part of the whole wedding was?" Jake asked Emma. "What?" "When Judge Martinez asked if I would love and protect you and your mom for the rest of my life, and you whispered, 'Say yes,' really loud so everyone can hear." Emma laughed. "I wanted to make sure you meant it. I meant it then, and I mean it now, and I'll mean it when you're all grown up with a family of your own." Will you still fix things for me when I'm grown up? As long as these hands work, sweetheart. That's what daddies do. Emma studied the wedding photo with the serious expression she wore when processing important thoughts. Mrs. Peterson says that some families start with a mama and daddy who fall in love and then have babies. But our family started with a little girl who needed saving and a daddy who needed to learn how to love again. Sarah and Jake exchanged glances over Emma's head, still amazed by their daughter's wisdom and emotional intelligence. Both kinds of families are perfect, Sarah said gently. What matters is that we choose each other every day, like how Jake chose to stop and help me instead of driving away. Exactly like that. Emma reached for the photo, holding it carefully as she traced their faces with one finger. I'm glad you stopped, Daddy. I'm glad you weren't too scared to love us. Jake pulled his daughter close, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and feeling the solid warmth of her against his chest. I'm glad too, baby girl. I'm glad too. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and inside their small house, a family that had been born from courage and kindness settled in for another evening of the simple happiness they'd learned to treasure above all else.